vanished without a trace.
I knew instantly that she had been murdered.
For the next 2 hours, we'll investigate 20 of the most mysterious misdeeds of the last 75 years.
We have lost a child here.
Robberies, poisonings, and murders, unsettling and unexplained.
Maybe this is a guy that has something to hide.
From old cold cases to breaking news, we're counting down the 20 most shocking unsolved crimes.
I knew something was terribly wrong, and it all spiraled down into hell from there.
A trip to the mall, an innocent request, and a gruesome homicide. Shocking unsolved crime number 20 is the abduction and murder of Adam Walsh.
The disappearance of that little boy, just 6 years old at the time, struck the American heart like no other, and the issue of missing children has never been the same.
On July 27, 1981, Reve Walsh took her 6-year-old son Adam to the Hollywood, Florida mall. She needed a lamp.
Adam asked her if he could watch 2 sets of boys play video games. Video games were brand new. There was a model video game there, just like kids do now, to look at the newest games. We called him the little gentleman. He asked his mom, "Can I stay here and watch these boys?"
It was the last time his mother saw him alive. When Reve returned to the toy department, Adam was nowhere to be found.
No one helped Reve look for Adam. They told her to go to customer service. Reve started the search, the most painful 2 weeks that you can ever imagine, looking for that little boy. She called the police immediately. Took them forever to respond. I came from my office. I knew something was terribly wrong, and it all spiraled down into hell from there.
Within hours, 50 police officers and 100 volunteers were scouring every square inch of Hollywood, Florida, in cars, boats, and helicopters. But Adam had vanished, kidnapped in plain sight.
We just appreciate anything that anyone could give us any information on.
He should be here with us. Adam Walsh's case brought home that your child, the thing you love the most, can be taken in a flash even at the local mall.
Posters were plastered across South Florida. The boys' distraught parents, John and Reve Walsh, offered a $100,000 reward for Adam's return.
I started to get that gut feeling that they were overwhelmed. We designed the first missing child poster with a profile and a front picture and a name and a weight. We just were desperate to get the word out about Adam, because after the first couple of days, he wasn't even a big story anymore.
2 weeks later, on August 11th, John and Reve begged for their son's life on national television.
That was the worst day of our lives. That was the day after Good Morning America that they called us up and told us that the remains of a little boy had been found in a canal, and those remains were Adam.
2 fishermen discovered Adam's severed head.
I don't know who would do this to a 6-year-old child. I can't conceive of it.
But police were unable to find any clues pointing to Adam's killer. Over the years, countless suspects emerged, yet few proved credible. Even serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer was interviewed about the case in 1991.
There was another suspect.
John Walsh was certain his son's killer was a convicted mass murderer named Otis Toole, who died in prison in 1996.
I believe, and so do I think the vast majority of people who've really looked into Adam's case, that Otis Toole got away with Adam's murder. Hopefully there is justice in the next life, and he'll burn in hell for eternity for killing that little boy.
After Adam's death, John Walsh's life mission became clear. He quit his job as a hotel executive and tirelessly lobbied Congress for the formation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The agency was established in 1982.
The National Center was born with 2 primary missions. One was to reunite families, to bring missing children home, and to keep children safe from sexual exploitation and victimization.
But John Walsh was far from done. In 1988, he began hosting America's Most Wanted.
He has been an icon in the crime and justice field for many, many years.
To date, Walsh has helped bring nearly 1,000 fugitives to justice.
It's now been more than a quarter century since his little boy was abducted and brutally murdered. And he's never lost any of that intensity.
On the 25th anniversary of Adam's abduction, President George W. Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act into law.
This law makes an important step forward in this country's efforts to protect those who cannot protect themselves.
The Adam Walsh Act makes the failure to be compliant with the sex offender registry obligation a federal felony.
It's a great piece of legislation. We had the honor of having President Bush sign it on July 27th, the 25th anniversary of Adam's disappearance.
There was bigger news ahead. In December 2008, Hollywood, Florida police identified Adam Walsh's killer. Cops said circumstantial evidence finally proved overwhelming.
It is our determination and conclusion that Otis Poole was the abductor and murderer of Adam Walsh.
Although Adam's body has never been found, the case is now closed.
The not knowing has been a torture, but that journey's over.
He pioneered an entire musical genre. He was called the John Lennon of rap. And like Lennon, he was taken down by a gunman's bullet. Shocking unsolved crime number 19 is the murder of Jam Master Jay.
When you think of Jam Master Jay, you think of a father, a husband, a pioneer, a legend.
Jam Master Jay was born Jason Mizell in Queens, New York in 1965. He first achieved fame in 1986, manning the turntables on Run DMC's crossover hit, Walk This Way.
The DJ used to just be the guy that played a record. Jay knocked that wall down when the DJ's actually part of the group.
After the meteoric rise of Run DMC, Jay became a revered rap record producer. The DJ stayed close to his roots.
Hip-hop was always the best music and the best form, my only form of lifestyle.
Jam Master Jay wasn't one of these guys that has big success and that leaves the neighborhood and you never see him again. He was a man of the people. He was right there in the mix.
Jay was one of the strongest voices against the violence in rap culture.
Their music certainly didn't reflect a lot of the violence that the other artists involved in the East Coast-West Coast rivalry had permeating throughout their music.
He was seen as a peacemaker to most, but not all. On the night of October 30th, 2002, Jay was in his Jamaica, Queens recording studio with a couple of friends.
They were recording some beats when they got a knock at the door. One of the women inside of the studio opened the door and two gunmen burst in.
Both brandished handguns. One of them ordered everyone in the room to hit the floor. The other shot Jay point blank in the head with a .40 caliber pistol. The 37-year-old music trailblazer died instantly, inexplicably murdered in cold blood. 2,300 people came out for Jam Master Jay's funeral.
What hurt so much is the fact that somebody knew who he was, knew how much he meant to everybody, and still did him like that. Heroes are not exempt from being victims of our sickness with violence.
Despite all the attention in the weeks after the murder, the investigation stalled.
People that witnessed Jam Master Jay's murder probably don't want to talk about it for whatever reason, whether that's fear of retaliation or that's code of the streets.
There's very little protection for witnesses. Everybody knows that.
In this particular case, you have eyewitnesses that saw the perpetrator, so you need their cooperation to really present a case to the grand jury and even to arrest them.
To date, police have made no arrests. Coming up, a crazed serial killer terrorizes a nation, and a teenager's vacation causes an international incident.
I did not look at the destination. I did not do my homework.
Two trusting 20-somethings out to see the world. Two sleeping bags, one heinous double homicide. Shocking unsolved crime number 18 is the murder of Jason Allen and Lindsay Cutshall. The year, 2004. The location, Rock and Water Christian Adventure Camp in Kelowna, California. Jason Allen and Lindsay Cutshall were spending an idyllic summer working as camp counselors. Jason was a 26-year-old Bible college grad from Michigan. Lindsay was a 22-year-old pastor's daughter from Ohio. They were in love and engaged to be married that fall.
About 6 weeks after they had met, he had actually asked me for her hand in marriage. Once we got to know Jason better, we realized that he was the right guy for her and they were a great match.
On Friday, August 13th, as their work at the camp was winding down, Jason and Lindsay hopped in the car for a weekend getaway. The two Midwesterners wanted to see some Northern California sights before heading home for their wedding. They never made it to the altar.
Kathy, my wife, got a call from the camp asking us if we knew where Jason and Lindsay were, and right away we knew something was terribly wrong.
The urgency grew and grew to where we came to a place where it was like there's something definitely wrong.
On Wednesday the 18th, those fears were confirmed.
Our sheriff's helicopter located the victims in sleeping bags.
He noticed that there were sleeping bags on the beach, but he also recognized that no one was moving. So that's when the police checked it out, and they came and discovered their bodies there on the beach.
The victims, Lindsay Cutshaw and Jason Allen, were discovered deceased on the Sonoma coast north of Jenner.
Chris called me on the phone and he said, you know, are you alone? And I said, yeah, I'm alone. And I went out to the garage and he told me that. He said, you know, Lindsay is dead and Jason's dead. And that was really hard. It was a defining moment in my life.
They'd each been shot once in the head by a .45 caliber Marlin rifle.
It appears that the killer came up, shot them, and simply disappeared.
You don't know what provoked it, and you don't know whether anybody's safe if they're in the same situation.
It seems to be just a random, senseless act of killing.
Detectives followed hundreds of leads and questioned nearly everybody in the nearby town of Jenner. There weren't many clues. Nothing of value was missing, and there was no evidence of sexual assault. Investigators found a journal in a driftwood structure nearby.
People would go in and make journal entries. You know, just random things were written down in the book.
Both Jason and Lindsay wrote in that notebook, and Lindsay talked about the sunset, and Jason wrote about the wonder of his relationship with Lindsay. And those were just wonderful gifts that shared their heart with us just hours before their deaths.
The book had been out there for probably 2 to 3 months prior to this incident occurring. So if anybody had made a journal entry in there, we would like them to come forward and just talk to us about, you know, their observations.
A Camo 40 beer bottle left near the scene was a brand available only at a few local specialty stores.
It may or may not have been left there, you know, by the person involved in this case.
Investigators were also looking for a vehicle that was reportedly parked north of the beach.
We'd like the person who owns this vehicle to come forward and talk to us. They may have witnessed something significant related to this case.
In September 2004, Lindsay's father had planned to officiate at his daughter's wedding. Instead, he presided over her funeral.
They're in heaven, and that gives us great comfort, but at the same time, there's great pain.
Jason and Lindsay's ashes were buried together, 2 miles from Lindsay's childhood home. A $50,000 reward remains unclaimed.
We feel that there is somebody out in the public at this point who has information that would help the Sheriff's Department solve this crime.
There's not a day that goes by that we do not grieve, but there's not a day that goes by that we do not thank God for Jason and Lindsay. And we're also very grateful for the many lives that have been touched and changed because of this tragedy.
Coming up, a series of senseless and random murders. Or are they? Plus,
I came up to the car and he was lying across with his head on the steering wheel.
Before the World Trade Center, before Oklahoma City, a single act of domestic terrorism ushered in an era of consumer panic. Shocking unsolved crime number 17 is the Tylenol poisoning scare.
The Tylenol murders was the first time in American history that terrorism actually reached into American homes and showed us how vulnerable we really are.
The nation's trust in its favorite painkiller was about to be destroyed.
On September 29, 1982, a young girl named Mary Kellerman, she was 12 years old, went to her parents' bedroom, complaining that she wasn't feeling very well.
Her parents gave her an extra-strength Tylenol capsule and sent her back to bed. By lunchtime, she was dead. That same day, a 27-year-old woman from nearby Winfield, Illinois, took 2 capsules for a headache. She died within hours. A 27-year-old suburban Chicago man was the next to die, followed quickly by his 19-year-old wife and 25-year-old brother. All 3 family members took capsules from the same bottle of Tylenol.
Several firefighters in the Chicago area were talking about the oddity of these people keeling over, and they detected the fact that all of these people took Tylenol right beforehand.
Authorities looked at the remaining pills in the family's Tylenol bottle and found capsules laced with deadly potassium cyanide.
It was 10,000 times more than the amount that would kill an average person.
The cyanide is a chemical compound which is found in various kinds of industrial products.
It basically shuts down the metabolic machinery of all your cells. You can ingest cyanide and be dead in seconds to minutes.
Meanwhile, the makers of the pain reliever, Johnson & Johnson, issued a recall.
Johnson & Johnson felt that their #1 responsibility was to the consumers, even to the point of withdrawing all of the products from the shelves in the Chicago area, actually nationwide, so that any risk would be removed.
But the death toll kept rising. 7 victims in just 72 hours. Almost from the start, police ruled out a manufacturing problem with the medication.
It was determined, and fairly quickly, that somebody was taking the capsules apart and putting in a small amount of cyanide and putting them back together and then putting them on the shelves.
Ultimately, more than 30 million capsules of Tylenol were recalled, costing Johnson & Johnson an estimated $100 million. The question remained, who could commit such a crime, and why?
Sick people commit crimes like this. Some people do it because there's a revenge motive, they're angry at the company. Some people do it for the kicks, to see if they can read their names in the news and know that they got away with it.
After a 6-month investigation, authorities had no viable leads. New tamper-proof packaging was introduced, packaging that is now the norm for almost all forms of consumable products.
To this day, we now have to struggle to open your medications because now they're tamper-proof.
It also led to the 1983 Tylenol bill, which made the tampering of any consumer products a federal offense.
In 1986, after yet another death, Johnson & Johnson stopped manufacturing their products in capsule form.
They then withdrew all capsules and destroyed them. And sometime later came out with what's still on the market today called caplets, but you can't tamper with that the same way that people could tamper with the capsules.
The identity of the Tylenol poisoner still remains a mystery. At 21, he was dubbed the rock and roll king of the Southwest. At 22, he was called the next Elvis Presley. At 23, he was dead. Number 16 on our list is the mysterious death of Bobby Fuller. Bobby and his brother Randy moved to Los Angeles in 1965 with his band, the Bobby Fuller 4.
The Bobby Fuller 4's greatest hit, without a doubt, was I Fought the Law.
It was a really good cut, a really good recording of it, and it just, you could tell it was going to be a hit.
July 18th, 1966, Hollywood, California. According to published reports, Lorraine Fuller discovered the lifeless body of her oldest son, Bobby, face down in the front seat of her 1962 Oldsmobile.
I came up to the car and he was lying across with his head under the steering wheel.
You could tell he had rigor mortis, and you could see blood marks on him.
Local newspapers reported a gas can was found near Bobby's head. Most of the contents had been poured over his body and inside his mouth. His face was blood red and swollen.
If you find somebody deceased with unexplained injuries, it raises the question of the involvement of another person.
According to published reports, detectives failed to tape off the crime scene or dust the area for fingerprints. One publication claimed a witness reported seeing a plainclothes officer throwing the gas can into the trash. Yet the coroner's report officially labeled the death accident or suicide. Case closed.
The injuries that were found were, in my opinion, far too significant, extensive, and atypical to be associated with a suicide.
He was on the verge of major success. People were talking about him about being the next Buddy Holly. He had everything to live for.
Fuller's friends and fans proposed several theories about his death. An overdose of the popular drug LSD was possible, but unlikely.
If someone were to die while under the influence, then there should be LSD left in the system that you can detect.
Another theory suggested Bobby was killed for insurance money.
I had partners, and apparently they had taken out a policy, which I didn't know anything about.
No such policy was ever paid out. Some even speculated the mob was involved.
That's the first thing everybody goes to, oh, the gangsters. But I don't personally feel that there was anything like that.
In the end, the official report was changed from suicide to accident. An accident forever shrouded in mystery. When we return to 20 most shocking unsolved crimes.
When the kids were
coming off the bus, he would pick them off, one by one.
He claims to have killed 37 people. His story has inspired a dozen books and 2 movies. He is one of America's worst serial killers. And his identity remains a mystery. Shocking Unsolved Crime number 15 is the case of the Zodiac Killer.
This man had a reign of terror, and he was randomly killing people for the kicks of it.
The date was December 20th, 1968, and a serial killer was about to claim his first victims. Teenagers David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were parked in a station wagon at a lover's lane in Vallejo, California.
David Faraday was shot once in the head and was killed very quickly, and Betty Lou Jensen apparently started to flee, and she was shot several times in the back.
6 months later, at a different lover's lane in Vallejo, the killers struck again. This time, using a 9mm handgun, he killed 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and wounded 19-year-old Michael Majot.
He actually was tossed into the back seat by the force of bullets and presumed dead, but he survived.
Shortly after, a man who said he was the shooter calmly phoned Vallejo police.
He didn't want to leave it up to the police to link the murders. He wanted to take credit immediately, and he reported his own crime.
On July 31st, 3 area newspapers received a handwritten letter from someone claiming to be the murderer.
To prove that he was the actual culprit, he included details that only he and the police would have known.
There were ominous instructions to print part of an encrypted message on the front page of each newspaper.
They contain cryptograms, these puzzles that you have to decipher. And when you decipher them, you see that he's threatening to kill more people.
The letters also gave the killer a name, Zodiac. True to his word, Zodiac struck again in September 1969. College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking at Lake Berryessa in Napa Valley.
He was wearing a black hood, and he was wielding a knife, a foot-long knife. He approached his victims, and then he stabbed them.
Zodiac penned another cryptic note on the side of Hartnell's Volkswagen.
He immediately called the Napa Police Department and again took credit for the killing. He wrote on their car the dates of the other murders and the Zodiac sign to instill more terror.
Barely 2 weeks later, Zodiac claimed yet another victim.
He kills a cab driver in the Presidio Heights section of San Francisco, shoots him with a 9mm gun, takes an article of his clothing or a piece of his clothing, sends the piece of clothing along with another letter.
This time, the serial killer threatened to execute a busload of students.
He was going to be a sniper, shoot out the tire of the school bus, and then when the kids were coming off the bus, he would pick them off, one by one.
Thankfully, that threat was never carried out.
The Zodiac Killer had done almost everything you could to try to get caught. He made phone calls, but by the time they got to those phone booths, he wasn't there. He sent letters, he sent puzzles, he taunted them.
One of the last verified letters from the Zodiac Killer was postmarked in May 1974. No one's sure how many murders were actually committed by the man who called himself the Zodiac Killer, but at least 5 deaths are confirmed. According to investigators, the most likely suspect was a convicted child molester named Arthur Lee Allen. Allen died in 1992 of a heart attack.
The fact is, there wasn't a stitch of evidence to connect him to the Zodiac murders.
DNA samples of saliva found on envelopes mailed by the Zodiac Killer were compared to samples of Allen's DNA in 2007. They did not match. Coming up.
I think it was someone who knew her and just decided to murder her.
It's a real-life James Bond story, a tale of international intrigue, a teacup full of poison, and one dead spy. Shocking Unsolved Crime number 14 is the assassination of Alexander Litvinenko.
Alexander Litvinenko was a former KGB agent, later an agent of the FSB, which was sort of a successor to the KGB in Russia.
After 12 years in service to his country, Litvinenko experienced a crisis of conscience. In a 1998 press conference, he publicly accused his bosses at the FSB, including one Vladimir Putin, of ordering the assassinations of Russian businessmen for their own financial gain.
This did not sit well, as you can imagine, with his bosses, and that, for all intents and purposes, was the end of his career.
Putin went on to become president of Russia in 1999. Litvinenko fled to England in 2000.
He became an outspoken opponent of Putin's and the intelligence agency.
Then, on the night of November 1st, 2006, Litvinenko fell ill. He went to the hospital on November 3rd.
He lost a lot of weight. He was losing his hair. You could see that this was a man just deteriorating before our eyes.
As he got worse and worse, the medical personnel, they knew that he'd been poisoned. At least he had all of the symptoms of poisoning, but they didn't know how to treat it. They didn't know what to test for.
When scientists finally did determine the type of poison, their diagnosis was a virtual death sentence. The former spy was poisoned with a highly toxic and rare chemical element, radioactive polonium-210.
Polonium is a very unusual substance that you don't find in the course of normal activities, but outside of the laboratory and a few industrial applications, you don't expect to see it.
Litvinenko died on November 21st. Scotland Yard began investigating his death as a murder. 27 locations in and around London were contaminated with traces of radioactive polonium-210.
They found traces of polonium in restaurants, I believe in a taxi cab. The exposure then had spread to enough degree that you could track it.
And then they found the smoking gun. Investigators determined Litvinenko met with 3 Russian men at London's Millennium Hotel on November 1st. A teapot at the hotel produced a radioactive reading that was off the charts.
I mean, how did somebody get a hold of this, and how was this, given to him?
Was Litvinenko killed by friends of Putin to silence his criticism? Or was the murder committed by Putin's enemies to discredit his administration?
On his deathbed, Alexander Litvinenko publicly accuses Vladimir Putin of being responsible for his poisoning and ultimately his death.
British authorities suspect former KGB bodyguard Andrei Lugovoy. He was one of the men Litvinenko met that fateful November night.
He did cooperate a little bit with Scotland Yard and then suddenly left the country and went back to Russia.
UK prosecutors asked Russian authorities to return Lugovoy to England to stand trial.
Even though everyone believes that Andrei Lugovoy is responsible for the murder of Alexander Litvinenko, Russia refuses to extradite this man to England.
Instead, officials in Moscow pledged to investigate the incident themselves.
In the end, a lot of people are very skeptical that the Kremlin will actually do any sort of thorough investigation into a case like this, because the last thing they'd want to do is show that a former KGB official had something to do with the death of Alexander Litvinenko.
The body of Alexander Litvinenko was buried in a lead-lined coffin in a London cemetery. The former spy's assassin remains at large. A woman with no enemies, a fire of suspicious origin, one dead body, and no suspects. Unsolved crime number 13 is the murder of Vanessa Yvette Johnson. In 2003, Vanessa Johnson was living her dream. The 39-year-old was a newlywed with her own business.
Vanessa was a very happy, outgoing person. She loved to help people. She was very helpful. What she wanted in life, she went after, and she got whatever made her happy.
On February 8th, Vanessa left home at 10 a.m. for her secondhand clothing store in Rockville, Maryland.
The post office is right next door. The postal employee was coming back from his route, and he noticed smoke and fire coming from the area of the consignment shop.
I couldn't even imagine this happening. I thought it was like a nightmare.
Fire department came, and they got in and started extinguishing the fire. They subsequently found a body in the back of this store.
Inside, firefighters found Vanessa's partially burned body. She had been stabbed 14 times.
The police described to me that Vanessa put up a big fight because she was stabbed so many times, but her hands were swollen and fingers cut.
As with most murder cases, the victim's husband, Clifford Sosin, came under suspicion.
Vanessa met Cliff actually on the internet. And he seemed like a very nice person, very into Vanessa and, you know, what she wanted and what things she wanted to aspire to. And I was very fond of him. They had a good relationship as far as I could see.
Police questioned Sosin, but he was 30 miles away at a computer show when the crime was committed. He was quickly dismissed as a suspect.
I do not believe that Mr. Sosin is knowingly responsible for what happened to his wife.
After Cliff Sosin was cleared, there was only one suspect, and nobody knew who she was.
The police had an eyewitness, that was a mailman, and he gave a description of a woman, I think, leaving the store, but he only saw her from the back.
They described the person as an African-American female wearing a hat, which they described as kind of like a pillbox-style hat.
It's just been really hard for them to actually have a really good suspect. They have lots of leads, the police, but they're all kind of unfounded right now.
The possible motive was just as unclear as the description of the suspect.
Clearly the motive was not robbery because they didn't take Vanessa's purse with her cash and her credit cards, and they also didn't take Vanessa's Mercedes that was parked there on the premises with the keys having been in the purse.
We thought maybe it was just someone that just maybe had some type of grievance with Vanessa.
I believe that the clear purpose of the person being there was to kill her and to set the store on fire in order to cover, in an attempt to cover up the crime.
To me, it was premeditated because they brought the gasoline with them. I think it was someone who knew her and just decided to murder her.
On May 16, 2003, Vanessa's friends and family came together in her honor. She would have turned 40 years old that day.
The Victims' Rights Foundation had a prayer vigil for Vanessa. There was something like 200 or so people to come out. A lot of them were family members, but others were just people who lived in that community. They were so surprised that a murder would take place in their own backyard.
We released 40 balloons for her birthday, and just were together. There have been other birthdays since. I still go to the park and release balloons for her. I still do.
Vanessa's killer remains at large.
That would be one of the happier days of my life when I found out who murdered Vanessa.
Coming up on 20 Most Shocking Unsolved Crimes.
They told me that her throat was cut multiple times. Her body was nude except for one white sock.
A 9-year-old brutally slain. A senseless death that outraged the country and forever changed how we search for missing children. Shocking unsolved crime number 12 is the murder of Amber Hagerman.
Amber Hagerman is another horrible murder of a beautiful little girl that still remains unsolved. But out of that tragedy came something really, really positive.
The Amber Alert. It is now a familiar part of American life. And it started with the disappearance of one little girl.
Amber was just such a loving child, and she loved everybody. She was very sweet, very kind. She was a very happy little girl. She was the love of our lives.
On January 13th, 1996, Amber Hagerman and her 5-year-old brother Ricky left their home in Arlington, Texas.
They got on the bikes, and as always, millions of times they went around the block, and they were supposed to come right back. Well, Amber didn't come right back. I asked Ricky, where's Sissy at? And, I don't know, Mommy. And so my father, he went and got his truck. He went to look for her, and he seen her bicycle laying there, and not Amber, nowhere in sight.
Amber was abducted from an abandoned Winn-Dixie parking lot.
I started crying and screaming and walking towards where she was abducted at and screaming her name in disbelief. It can't be happening.
The only witness to the crime, 78-year-old Jimmy Kevill, could provide few details. He described Amber's kidnapper as a man in a black pickup truck.
He turns around to see her just in time, the man picking her up off her bicycle, throwing her in the black truck, and the black truck drives off, and they're gone.
Immediately, local and state law enforcement began searching the area by ground and air.
We got more and more FBI agents and more police officers, and it just grew bigger and bigger, and still just no luck.
I want my baby home. Just let her go, please. Just let her go. She'll find her way home.
If Amber's kidnapper saw Donna's plea, he wasn't moved.
Well, I wanted my little girl found. The media was the only thing that I was able to do. So I did as many interviews as I could. I got Amber's picture out as much as I could.
A man walking his dog found Amber's body 4 days after her disappearance.
The head was face down in the water. Most of the body was kind of crooked around a rock. The current was running fairly fast behind it.
They told me that her throat was cut multiple times. Her body was nude except for one white sock, and her body was face down in the creek bed.
Amber's gruesome death touched a nerve and affected a nation.
Amber and me, we were just everyday normal people. We were just quiet country folks that mind our business, and I was really shocked how the media got involved and how it spread so fast, and it just seemed like the whole world knew about Amber and just within days.
The Center for Missing and Exploited Children helped launch a national early warning system to notify the public whenever a child is abducted. A system they named Amber.
Time is the enemy in the search for a missing child. In 74% of abduction homicides, the child is dead within the first 3 hours. So we have got to mobilize the eyes and ears of the public to generate that key piece of information.
Amber Alerts have become an increasingly important tool in rescuing kidnapped children.
I did not want another mother to feel the way I am feeling, or another child to be butchered like my little girl was. And I knew I just had to just get up and stand up for our kids' rights and for other mothers.
360 children's lives have already been saved as a direct result of Amber Alert broadcasts.
That really changed the way that people look for missing children by using the national media. So out of that terrible, horrible, unsolved case has come something really positive and a real legacy for little Amber.
The search for Amber's killer continues. Still, Donna Norris can take some solace.
It means a lot to me because, you know, when my daughter was here, she was always such a little mommy to other children, and she always took care of them. So I think this is just another way for her to keep doing what she was doing, taking care of children and keeping them safe.
Coming up on 20 Most Shocking Unsolved Crimes, a nation is paralyzed when murder comes by mail, and a beautiful little girl meets an ugly end. Plus,
she allegedly said the minute that she realized her daughter wasn't there, they've taken her.
It was the largest art theft in U.S. history, and it took just 81 minutes. Shocking Unsolved Crime number 11 happened at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. It might have been the perfect time to commit a crime in Boston. The early morning hours after St. Patrick's Day. That's when 2 men dressed as police officers showed up at the Gardner Museum near Boston's Fenway Park. It was 1:24 a.m. on March 18th, 1990. The 2 phony policemen buzzed the intercom. They claimed to be investigating a disturbance on the grounds. The guards took the bait and let them in.
The security guards were actually brought to the basement of the museum and restrained, tied up, and they were put at opposite ends of the basement.
The thieves now had free rein in the museum, and they seemed to know exactly what they wanted.
The thieves stole 13 pieces of priceless art from the museum, including Rembrandt's Storm in the Sea of Galilee, which is a significant piece because it is the only known seascape of Rembrandt's. They also stole Vermeer's The Concert, which represents one of only about 32 pieces done by Vermeer.
A Manet painting, 5 Degas sketches, the eagle on top of a Napoleonic flag.
Just cutting them out of the frames, and to this day, you can actually see the jagged remains of the paintings by these great, great masters.
The robbers then removed the museum's surveillance video. By 2:45 a.m., they were gone. All told, the thieves got away with 13 masterpieces worth an estimated $100 million at the time.
The art theft here at the Gardner Museum in 1990 represents the largest art theft in American history. Values have been assessed ranging from $200 million to $500 million and more.
The descriptions of the suspects didn't help much. In police reports, the guards said the men were 2 30-ish white guys with mustaches that may have been fake. Over the years, the FBI pursued more than 2,000 leads, involved agents from 56 different offices, and traveled to 4 continents.
We've looked at the common everyday thief, we've looked at drug cartels, we've looked at international theft rings.
The Gardner Museum is currently offering a $5 million reward for information which leads directly to the recovery of the art in good condition.
Despite the continued interest, police are no closer to solving the case today than they were in 1990.
The museum and the FBI have received a large number of leads, and both of us have worked hard to follow each of them.
Isabella Stewart Gardner's will states no paintings in her museum are to be sold or replaced. The empty frames of the stolen paintings still hang in the gallery, providing silent testament to the greatest art theft in history. A loud thud. A suspicious bloodstain. Miles of ocean in every direction. Unsolved crime number 10 is the mysterious disappearance of George Allen Smith.
My son boarded a Royal Caribbean ship for his honeymoon and he never got off.
On June 29, 2005, Connecticut newlyweds George Allen Smith and his wife, Jennifer Hagel Smith, arrived in Barcelona, Spain. That night, they set sail on an 11-day Mediterranean honeymoon cruise.
During an evening, they sort of went their ways at one point on the ship.
Ship records showed George used a key card to enter his room at 4:02 that morning. According to the cruise line, security personnel escorted Jennifer back to her stateroom at 4:48. George was nowhere to be seen. In the light of morning, passengers noticed a blood stain on a lifeboat canopy a few floors below the newlyweds' balcony.
The question is, did he injure himself because he was drinking and fall overboard? Did he get pushed? Was it murder?
Smith's disappearance led to congressional hearings about how such incidents are reported by cruise ships.
Though we all love and miss George very much, today is not simply about George. This is a much larger issue.
We need to hold the cruise line industry accountable, and that's what we want to have accomplished by these hearings.
One thing good about the George Smith case is it highlighted the danger Americans face on the high seas.
The body of George Allen Smith has never been found. A southern socialite, a spacious riverfront mansion, and signs of a violent struggle. Shocking unsolved crime number 9 is the mysterious disappearance of furniture heiress Jacqueline Levitz.
She was a wonderful person, very kind, beautiful, and lived a royal life for, I guess, 25 or 30 years.
People would have noticed her. They would have known that she was rich and living alone.
In the late afternoon of November 18, 1995, 62-year-old Jacqueline picked up wallpaper samples for her new home. Her family and friends never saw her again.
She would call every day, and the weekend that she went missing, she didn't call.
A brother-in-law decided to go to the house and check on her. The Jaguar was parked in the driveway. The front door was open. He went inside and saw what looked like signs of a struggle.
And Jacqueline Levitz was gone.
He called the police, and we just knew that something was wrong.
Several broken fake fingernails littered the floor. A mattress in the bedroom was soaked with blood. Police were baffled. The clues didn't add up.
She was easy prey for somebody who wanted to rob her or perhaps try to kidnap her for ransom, but there's never been a ransom demand.
A huge pair of diamond earrings were still sitting out. The home had not been plundered in any way.
You probably are dealing with somebody who has committed an impulsive act, who then realizes that it will be easily detected.
Police searched the area with bloodhounds and a helicopter.
We did river searches because of the close proximity to the river. We brought in canine teams, specially trained cadaver dogs, searched from the air.
Their efforts proved fruitless.
We continue to this day to follow leads and continue the search for Jackie and for answers.
We just never give up. We keep hoping and praying that someday we'll find out what happened to her.
You never know when you're interviewing someone if little tidbits of information that they may think is completely insignificant may be vital to the investigation.
In February 2001, 5 years after her disappearance, Jacqueline Levitz was declared legally dead.
We had a memorial service. Other than that, there has been no closure. It's just a mystery.
When 20 Most Shocking Unsolved Crimes continues, a holiday ends in horror.
When a child goes missing, the very first suspects are always the parents.
The only thing more heartbreaking than losing a child? At one point being named a suspect in her disappearance. Shocking unsolved crime number 8 is the mystery of Madeleine McCann. On May 3rd, 2007, Kate and Jerry McCann were wrapping up a 7-day holiday at the upscale Mark Warner Ocean Club Apartments.
This was a British couple who was on vacation in Portugal in Praia da Luz, in a beautiful resort town, had rented an apartment there, was there with their daughter Madeleine and their 2 twin children.
On their last night, Jerry and Kate put the kids to bed and met 7 friends for dinner.
The buildings were kind of spread apart, and the McCanns, were dining, and they left their children in their apartment.
They were, in fact, a full football field length away from their child. They could have gotten babysitters at this luxury resort there in Portugal. They didn't. They could have easily afforded it. They didn't. They left the children totally alone.
They would each take turns going to check on the children. The mom went, the dad went, and one of their dining companions went.
According to the parents, they were popping back in to check on their children every 30 minutes.
Around 10 p.m., Kate checked the bedroom where she'd left Madeleine. According to published reports, witnesses heard Kate scream.
Kate McCann's reaction has raised some eyebrows. She allegedly said the minute that she realized her daughter wasn't there, "They've taken her," which people found a little odd. Maybe she just disappeared or wandered off on her own.
She screamed, "Oh my God, Maddie's gone, they've taken Maddie." Not only was the apartment unlocked, but a window was open.
Over the next several days, 130 police officers and volunteers combed the Portuguese countryside. There was no sign of the little girl.
Until there is concrete evidence to the contrary, we believe that Madeleine is safe and being looked after, and that is how we can continue in our efforts.
Tips poured in from across Europe and beyond. Alleged sightings of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl came from all over the world.
There have been sightings in Portugal, in Morocco, in Belgium. She has a very distinctive iris of a right eye, a birthmark, so to speak, that can easily eliminate any of these children who are allegedly Madeleine in other countries.
The McCanns pledged not to leave Portugal without their oldest daughter. But then the case took an ugly twist. In September 2007, Portuguese authorities named Kate McCann as a suspect in her daughter's disappearance.
They're getting a very raw deal from that small police department in Portugal that made incredible mistakes, that had no experience on what to do when a child is kidnapped or missing.
Allegations flew about what may have happened to the missing toddler.
It is rumored that Portuguese police tried to coerce baby Maddie's mother into a confession because they didn't have any other idea. Now, if that is true, shame on the Portuguese police.
Another theory is perhaps she was abducted to be sold because she is a beautiful white blonde child with relatively light eyes, which is apparently quite a commodity in many parts of the world.
The McCanns returned to England September 9th, 2007.
Whilst it's heartbreaking to return to the UK without Madeleine, it does not mean we're giving up our search for her.
There was a fundamental flaw in this whole investigation, and that's why there was no way for them to keep them there. They weren't going to charge them. They just didn't have the evidence.
In October, a Portuguese judge ruled there was no evidence to warrant continued questioning of Madeleine's parents. By July 2008, Portugal's Attorney General ordered police to halt the investigation for lack of evidence. The McCanns were then formally cleared as suspects. Authorities said they would reopen the case if new details emerged. There have still been no arrests.
I'd like to express our sincere gratitude and thanks to everybody, but particularly the local community here who have offered so much support. Please continue to pray for Madeleine. She's lovely.
When we return, a killer goes postal.
I believe that it's the type of attack that we must prepare for to happen again.
When a microscopic killer is unleashed, a terrified nation is once again jolted by fear. No one claims responsibility. No one's ever charged. Shocking unsolved crime number 7 is the anthrax murders of 2001. The terrorist attacks of September 11th were a turning point in American history. The methods were brazen. The targets were clear.
There was fear, paranoia, suspicion. Everybody was on edge.
Just 8 days later, America was attacked again. This time, the weapon was nearly invisible.
This was a different type of attack, a biological attack, and people were dying.
On September 19th, tabloid photo editor Bob Stevens opened an envelope in his office in Boca Raton, Florida. A fine white powder spilled out. Stevens soon came down with flu-like symptoms.
The Centers for Disease Control has just confirmed the diagnosis of anthrax in a patient in the Florida hospital.
By October 5th, he was dead.
Anthrax is a very virulent bacillus, bacteria. It produces hemorrhages in internal organs and tissues. It damages the structures and the functions of those tissues.
Authorities from the FBI and the Center for Disease Control quarantined Smith's office and tested his staff. The results confirmed their worst fears. But the biological attack was just beginning.
What was so scary about the anthrax case is that who was being targeted? They were targeting senators. They were targeting major media players. They were putting this deathly poison where it could do the most damage.
Tom Brokaw's assistant developed skin anthrax. So did Dan Rather's. Both infections were linked to letters the employees handled.
The anthrax that was used in those letters were a cutaneous form of anthrax, which means that it affects primarily the skin and causes lesions.
2 New Jersey post office workers died of pulmonary anthrax in late October. 2 more women died of pulmonary anthrax in November, bringing the death toll to 5. Panicked people swamped police switchboards with calls.
Is my mail safe? Do I need to wear plastic gloves when I get my mail?
By the first week of November, nearly 20,000 people were taking antibiotics at the government's urging.
Ciprofloxacin is the treatment that you get for anthrax exposure. Of all the different types of antibiotics that you could give someone for this, Cipro seems to be the most effective.
The demand for the drug was so high that local pharmacies ran out. Then, just as quickly as the letters arrived, they stopped.
22 people in total were exposed to anthrax, and of those, 5 actually died.
I believe it was a coordinated attack. I believe that it's the type of attack that we must prepare for to happen again.
The FBI launched one of the largest investigations in history. Thousands of leads were generated.
The problem is those leads led to nowhere.
Since the attacks, the FBI has interviewed more than 5,000 people and served some 4,000 subpoenas in the case without making a single arrest. Then in August 2008, media reports revealed the FBI's main suspect was found dead on July 29th, an apparent suicide. Bruce E. Ivins was a top researcher in anthrax vaccines at a government-run bioweapons laboratory. According to news reports, prosecutors informed Ivins before his death that they planned to file charges against him in connection with the anthrax mailings. Ivins' attorney insisted the scientist was innocent.
Even though we all think we live in a CSI era where the FBI can always figure out who done it, it's not always that easy.
It's the stuff of legend. A lone man with just a weapon, his wits, and an audacious escape plan takes off with $200,000, never to be seen again. Unsolved Crime number 6 is the story of D.B. Cooper. It happened November 24th, 1971.
A middle-aged man dressed in a business suit paid $20 for a ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 305.
They didn't ask for ID. They didn't check your carry-ons or anything. Hijacking was not heard of back in those days.
The man boarded the flight in Portland, Oregon. On his ticket was the name Dan Cooper.
Shortly after the flight had taken off, he approached the stewardess who was passing by and handed her a note.
The note said, although no one knows for sure because he took the note back, I have a bomb in my briefcase and I am prepared to use it.
Cooper's demands? $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. FBI and police scrambled to collect 10,000 $20 bills from several area banks. Every serial number was recorded on microfilm. When the plane landed in Seattle, authorities delivered the 21 pounds of cash in a white cotton sack.
He does let the passengers go. He keeps all the crew members and he keeps a flight attendant back there with him.
Cooper then ordered the pilots to take off and fly to Mexico.
He tells them to fly no higher than 10,000 feet, and he tells them to put the flaps of the plane at 15 degrees. He knew that was as slow as the plane could go and as low as it could fly without danger, that he would be able to sort of jump.
At 8:12 p.m., Cooper opened the back door of the Boeing 727 and jumped into the cold and rainy northwestern night.
Had he landed in the trees, he would have survived. Whereas they say if you landed in water, then you're dead.
Some people think that he ended up in the bottom of a river, and he was there, and that someday his skeleton will be found.
Police weren't taking any chances. They launched a massive manhunt. After the weather cleared, they centered their search in a remote mountainous area 45 miles north of Portland, Oregon.
I believe 600 National Guardsmen were deployed through this pretty mountainous terrain. Nothing is ever found.
After the hijacking occurred, the FBI was interviewing a person whose name was D.B. Cooper, thinking that might be a suspect, and it turned out it wasn't. But the way they transmitted on the news was that the skyjacker's name was D.B. Cooper.
D.B. Cooper had vanished. But in 1980, almost 9 years after the hijacking, a fresh clue.
February 10th, 1980, a kid named Brian Ingram was playing in the banks of the Columbia River, digging in the sand when he uncovered what looked like some old, moldering $20 bills.
Authorities confirmed that the nearly $6,000 was part of D.B. Cooper's haul. But what did the discovery mean? How did the money end up on the riverbank? Where was Cooper and the rest of the money? Once again, the trail went cold.
Nothing was ever found, no clothing, no parachute, no shoe, no belt buckle, no bones in that area. And hunters and fishermen, people that used that woods, not one scrap has ever been found.
Since 1971, the FBI has investigated more than 1,100 serious suspects. In the meantime, Cooper the felon became Cooper the folk hero.
He's a guy who decided he was going to do this one big thing, and he's either going to make a lot of money or die doing it. And I think a lot of people like me like to believe that he survived.
To this day, the incident remains the only unsolved hijacking in U.S. history. Coming up.
She was really essentially entirely skeletonized at that point.
When we return to 20 most shocking unsolved crimes. She was like any other college girl, except she disappeared while she was allegedly dating a U.S. congressman. Shocking unsolved crime number 5 is the murder of Chandra Levy. 24-year-old Chandra Levy was a college student working in Washington, D.C.
Chandra Levy had just concluded an internship with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. She worked in their public affairs department.
She'd been given notice that the term was over, and that was it. She thought she was going to stay in Washington and get a job, and that had fallen through.
In late April, Chandra prepared to head back to California to attend her college graduation.
She had canceled her lease for her apartment and her gym membership, and told her parents and told others that she was going to come home and get her diploma.
Levy emailed her flight information to her parents. Then, the errands and emails stopped. Chandra's father, Robert, called D.C. police on May 6th after his daughter failed to return his phone calls.
I didn't think anything until the police went to her home and found her wallet, found her cell phone, found everything there. When you go out the door, you don't leave your wallet behind.
Police with cadaver-sniffing dogs scoured a nearby park where Chandra sometimes jogged, but there was no sign of the missing intern.
They looked through her phone records and her email to see who she was talking to and to see if she was having a problem with somebody, something that will give them a tip as to why she would disappear when she did.
What investigators discovered took them by surprise.
They found references in her emails to relatives that she was in this relationship with Congressman Condit.
He was the last person to speak with her. And because they had this relationship that was sort of a secretive relationship, it was something that people thought, well, maybe this is a guy that has something to hide.
This made California Congressman Gary Condit a person of interest to investigators.
Chandra and I had spoken about her having a life with Gary Condit. She told me that he was married, he had children, and that she was involved. She was having feelings for this person, strong feelings. She had said that there was this 5-year plan that he was going to finish his term out, and she was hopefully going to get a job in D.C., and that he was going to tell his wife, and he was going to end up being with her.
On July 6th, according to published reports, the 53-year-old congressman confessed to police that his relationship with Chandra was more than just platonic.
He did indeed admit to having an affair and having some connection with Chandra Levy in that regard, but to this day he maintains he had nothing to do with her disappearance.
Many in the press labeled Condit's behavior suspicious.
After this affair came out, it looked really bad for Gary Condit because the whole point here is that they had an affair, but does that mean he murdered her? And a lot of people made that association. There was never, ever any evidence to support that, but that was the implication.
Meanwhile, without a body, it was impossible to determine what happened to Chandra.
I believe and I continue to hope and pray that she will come back to us alive.
On May 22, 2002, at least part of the mystery was solved. A man hunting for turtles in a D.C. area park found the skeletal remains of a young woman.
I've received word from Dr. Arden over at the D.C. Medical Examiner's office that the remains found earlier today are in fact Chandra Levy.
Chandra Levy's remains were discovered in a wooded area in Rock Creek Park, a very large park in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, the scene of recovery of a murder victim.
It was our conclusion it definitely was a homicide. This was nowhere near a place where she could have accidentally stumbled.
Some knotted up running tights were found near the body. Police theorized they could have been used to strangle Chandra.
There was a suspicion of a small injury on the hyoid bone, high up on the neck beneath the lower jaw, and we felt that it suggested strangulation.
She was really essentially entirely skeletonized at that point. She had been there about 9 months or so since the time of her disappearance.
Today, the case is still open. Chandra's murderer is still out there.
Some people said that had Gary Condit come forward sooner, maybe it might have opened the air, maybe they might have even looked in other directions quicker. But because there were a lot of different roadblocks that authorities felt were happening, they had to kind of keep zeroing in on him.
Gary Condit was never charged with a crime, but his political career never recovered.
If he had initially come right out and said, look, yes, I had the relationship, no, I had nothing to do with her disappearance, maybe the voters would have been more forgiving. Maybe not. He didn't do that.
Levy's family still runs a website called WhoKilledChandra.com. They hope one day to bring her killer to justice. Coming up,
the killer cut into the side of her face and made her look clown-like.
A powerful labor boss with mob ties. A kidnapping with few clues. A whodunit that stumped investigators for 3 decades. Shocking unsolved crime number 4 is the disappearance of union boss Jimmy Hoffa.
Jimmy Hoffa is one of the most influential and yet notorious figures in terms of unions.
If you try to imagine somebody as well-known today as Oprah Winfrey, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton rolled into one, but with much more power than that combined group have presently, that was Jimmy Hoffa.
James Riddle Hoffa organized his first labor strike at the age of 17. In the 50s and 60s, he helped assemble one of the most powerful labor unions in history. At its peak, the Teamsters represented more than 2 million members. Hoffa combined toughness and street smarts. He was also a convicted felon with no shortage of enemies.
I don't have time to be vindictive in my life. I'm 58 years old. I feel that I have a long life ahead of me, and I'll take care of my own problems.
In 1964, he was convicted of attempted bribery, was sentenced to 15 years behind bars.
President Nixon actually commuted the sentence as long as Jimmy Hoffa promised that he wouldn't be involved in union affairs for at least 10 years. Behind the scenes, Jimmy Hoffa was building up his union empire again.
On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa arrived at the Macus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. Hoffa was there to meet 2 guys who had ties to the union and organized crime.
He was going to meet Tony Provenzano and Jack Giacolani. My understanding is that the purpose of that meeting was to iron out this whole issue of whether Jimmy Hoffa was going to run for the presidency of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
Jimmy called his wife when neither man appeared, but somebody else did show up. Hoffa was last seen by an eyewitness leaving the parking lot of the restaurant in the back seat of a dark red Mercury Marquis. Jimmy was sitting next to a man who appeared to be holding a shotgun. Police found Hoffa's abandoned car in the parking lot of the restaurant. There were no signs of a struggle.
My father, James R. Hoffa, has been missing for some 32 hours.
I think it's reasonable to assume that he knew somebody in that car. I don't think he would have gotten into a car with strangers.
At the present time, we have no information as to the present whereabouts of Mr. Hoffa.
There were a number of theories. Perhaps the mob wanted to silence a man they feared could give away secrets. Maybe the union brass were afraid Hoffa was going to take back leadership of the Teamsters. Some thought Hoffa was involved in other criminal ventures that somehow went awry.
The issue that was framed when he disappeared was, where is Jimmy Hoffa? Not who killed Jimmy Hoffa.
It's been more than 30 years since Hoffa's disappearance. Police have searched dozens of locations for the missing labor leader.
I've heard that he might be buried under the 50-yard line of Giants Stadium, that he's in the footings of the Mackinac Bridge, that he's in the foundation of the Renaissance Center in Detroit. There are many, many different suggestions about what might have happened with Jimmy Hoffa. The fact is, we just don't know.
In 2004, former Teamsters official Francis Sheeran allegedly confessed on his deathbed that he shot Hoffa in a Bloomfield, Michigan home and transported his body to a nearby incinerator.
Within a minute and a half of the house on Beaverland Street are 2 cremation ovens in the Grand Lawn Cemetery. Before the hit, Sharon was told that Hoffa would be cremated, that there would be no body.
DNA tests of stains found at the house did not match Hoffa. Most recently, in 2006, a barn at a Michigan horse farm was demolished as the FBI searched for Jimmy's remains. Still no Hoffa.
Don't hold your breath. Whoever got rid of Jimmy Hoffa's body many years ago knew what they were doing. They were pros.
James Riddle Hoffa was declared legally dead in 1982. His son, James P. Hoffa, followed in Dad's footsteps as president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. It's a cautionary tale for every young woman who comes to Hollywood with a dream. It's been called the murder that changed Los Angeles. Shocking unsolved crime number 3 is the grisly death of the woman known as the Black Dahlia.
She was the perfect stereotype of what you would call prey. She was attractive, young, naive.
In 1946, 22-year-old aspiring actress Elizabeth Short moved to Los Angeles with visions of fame. On the evening of January 9th, 1947, Betty Short headed out for a night on the town. Short's mutilated remains were found 6 days later in a vacant lot. Her mouth had been sliced into a gruesome smile. Her nude body had been cut cleanly in half and drained of blood.
It's about the most heinous thing that you could do to a woman.
They knew from the way she was cut in half that whoever did it had a lot of surgical skill.
It was evident from the lack of blood that Betty was killed elsewhere and dumped at the scene. But by whom?
It's open, there's streetlights, people live a block away.
Nobody was looking to hide this body. They wanted it to be found.
Thousands of people were questioned. No credible suspects emerged. The LA press dubbed the raven-haired Betty the Black Dahlia. Since 1947, more than 500 people have confessed to killing the Black Dahlia. Police don't believe any of them.
The fact is, there is nothing left of the physical evidence to compare.
If that evidence were available today, they could try to do the DNA testing on it, but that opportunity is long gone.
Ironically, through her gruesome death, Elizabeth Short achieved the fame she sought. Coming up, we're down to the final 2 shocking unsolved crimes on our list.
You have to be thinking in terms of the possibility of a psychosexual killer, a serial killer.
A 6-year-old girl has her life cut short. The clues in the case lead in every direction, yet nowhere at all. Shocking unsolved crime number 2 is the death of child beauty queen JonBenet Ramsey. August 16th, 2006. It was a break in the case nearly a decade in the making. Police arrested John Mark Carr, an American living in Thailand, for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. And they had a confession.
I was with JonBenet when she died.
Everyone was encouraged that perhaps, finally, this case that had frustrated so many people for so long had some kind of conclusion.
On August 28th, John Mark Carr was supposed to have his day in court. Instead, the results of a DNA test discredited him as a suspect. Investigators were suddenly back to square one. The false confession of John Mark Carr added yet another bizarre twist to a confounding crime that occurred almost 10 years earlier. It happened in Boulder, Colorado, the day after Christmas, 1996. Shortly after she awoke at 5 a.m., Patsy Ramsey claimed she found a ransom note on her stairs.
911 emergency. We are kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone.
Police officers arrived at the Ramseys' upscale 6,800 square foot home at 5:52 a.m. Detectives waited with Patsy for the kidnappers to call. The phone never rang. At around 2 p.m., John Benet's father, John, made a gruesome discovery.
The detective suggested, why don't you go look at everything? And so he went downstairs. One of the friends that had come to the house that morning was right behind him. That friend heard a loud scream and then saw John Ramsey running out of the room with his daughter's body.
Just moving an item of clothing or moving her body in the slightest way could detrimentally hurt the investigation.
The tiny beauty queen had been gagged with duct tape. She'd been struck in the head with a heavy, blunt object. Her wrists bound with white cord. She'd been sexually assaulted, then strangled. The evidence, what little there was, pointed in many directions.
You have to be thinking in terms of the possibility of a psychosexual killer, a serial killer.
Investigators found skin and hair fragments on John Benet's clothing and under her fingernails.
It didn't match any of the males in her family, didn't match any of the males that we could identify as having been friends of the family. And so that has never been answered.
Then there was the ransom note. The odd sum demanded in the letter, $118,000, was exactly the amount of John's bonus check.
If you do this, she'll be beheaded. If you try to grow a brain, she'll be murdered. This went on for 2.5 pages.
There are criminal trespassers who have targeted my family and who know a lot about me. And that's got to cry out for my cooperation with the police. And what do the Ramseys do? They stonewall.
We've been forced through leaks, innuendos, and allegations to try to defend ourselves in the court of public opinion.
The leaks repeatedly said, look, there's something really weird about the Ramseys' role in this.
The case soon whipped up a media firestorm, and the shiny, smiling pageant pictures of John Benet in heavy makeup and tiara seemed to appear everywhere.
That's what really spiked the curiosity of the American public, and then perhaps who could have been motivated to do harm to her because of that association.
One of the problems was that the police were focusing on the family as being responsible. The district attorneys, prosecutors, were focusing on a third-party intruder.
John and Patsy Ramsey's behavior didn't help the public's perception of them.
From the very early stages, they threw up defenses, and those defenses just didn't allow the police to dispel any suspicion, and so that led to further suspicion.
I did not kill my daughter, John Benet.
Let me assure you that I did not kill Jean Benet.
The reality is that when a child goes missing, the very first suspects are always the parents.
We have lost a child here. No one is going to win, even when we find the killer.
After a 3-year investigation, a Boulder, Colorado grand jury spent 9 months reviewing the evidence. In all, 122 suspects were considered and then cleared.
It really doesn't matter what my opinion is or what anybody's opinion is. What matters is there evidence that can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and it never rose to that level.
In December 2006, Patsy Ramsey died after a battle with ovarian cancer. In July 2008, District Attorney Mary Lacey announced that new DNA tests cleared Ramsey family members as suspects. Lacey said the test showed John Benet was murdered by an unknown male. The DA wrote John Ramsey an apology for the years of suspicion the Ramseys endured.
I think Jean Benet will never get justice. I don't think John Ramsey will ever know who killed his daughter. The stress and the nightmare of being a suspect in your daughter's own murder may have sped up Patsy Ramsey's demise. It's just a terrible case that I don't think will ever be solved.
Coming up, the #1 most shocking unsolved crime on our list.
I knew instantly that she was either had been murdered or that she had been kidnapped.
A tropical paradise, a teenager out on the town, Two parents' frantic mission to find their daughter. Shocking unsolved crime number 1 is the disappearance of Natalee Holloway. In spring 2005, 18-year-old Natalee Holloway was finishing up her senior year at Mountain Brook High School in Alabama.
She received an academic scholarship from the University of Alabama. She was totally looking forward to entering her freshman year that fall.
To celebrate, Natalee took a senior class trip to Aruba.
She just was so excited about the upcoming adventure and just everything that goes along with it. Never imagined that that would be the last time I would see my child alive.
Holloway and 124 of her classmates departed for the island on May 26th.
There was approximately 7 or 8 chaperones that went on the trip. They had daily checks on the students to make sure that everything was okay. I looked and thought that Aruba was as safe as a Disney World, and that's the picture they painted.
I thought of Aruba as being a small island with a few little tiki huts, tiki torches. I did not look at the destination. I did not do my homework and look at where I was sending her. That's where I made a mistake.
On May 29th, the last night of the trip, Natalee and her friends cut loose at a Boys to Men concert and then went to a local bar for late-night dinner and dancing. The next morning, the students were instructed to gather in the hotel lobby to depart for home. But Natalee never showed.
It's the phone call that no parent can imagine. It was a young girl, and she was just saying that my mother needs to speak with you. I knew instantly that she was either had been murdered or that she had been kidnapped.
Bad news traveled fast. Natalee's brother Matt called their father.
When Natalee missed that plane, we knew something was wrong because she was never late for anything. She was prompt, on time, and had everything planned out.
At 11 p.m., just 12 hours after her daughter went missing, Beth was in Aruba.
That's when we began the absolute nightmare of landing in Aruba and beginning to try to navigate, a foreign country.
It really set in when we first got on the island and realized that when we stopped at that first police station that no one knew what was going on. The lack of communications between the departments on an island that's only 20 miles long and 5 miles wide, I knew then that this is just not right.
According to published reports, the last people seen with Natalee that night were locals Joran Vandersloot and his 2 friends, the Calpo brothers.
We had the car that Natalee was last seen getting into. We had the description of the suspects, and we even had part of a name.
Joran Vandersloot was 17 years old. He's a Dutch national that lived in Aruba, met up with Natalee at the Holiday Inn Casino, and everybody in the group liked him, and he made a bond with some of those girls at that time.
The Aruban police questioned the young men, and Vandersloot told them Natalee was fine when he dropped her off at her hotel. Hotel security cameras never recorded Natalee's return.
Joran was actually taken into custody and named as a suspect, as were the Calpo brothers. From that point on, their stories changed a number of different times.
Joran denied any wrongdoing and was released from custody. The Calpo brothers also denied they had anything to do with Natalee's disappearance. Natalee's parents weren't convinced.
These young men were just merely toying with the interrogators. Stories became insurmountable. One lie would splinter off in 5 lies.
When you continue changing your story, that brings up a suspicion that you are involved in something.
The Holloway family plastered the island with pictures of Natalee.
We began taking those posters and just placing them on telephone poles, store windows, any place imaginable.
The Arubans were very, very helpful in the beginning of trying to find answers or even search for Natalee. In fact, the government let all the workers off one day to initiate a ground search across the island. We couldn't ask for anything better.
We just kept thinking, of course, with every tip that came in, this is it. We're just about to get her. Now we look back on them, just absolutely bizarre and crazy calls that were coming in.
We started a reward within the first few days. The reward now is $1 million for her safe return and $250,000 for information leading to her recovery.
Almost everyone is in agreement that Natalee was quite intoxicated on that evening. Some people have alleged was there narcotics ingested either voluntarily or involuntarily, as one of the theories of the case goes.
The known facts are we have the last 3 men that Natalee was seen alive with. We have the condition that she was in, according to the suspect's description of her and their statements. And then we have 22 different stories that they fabricated to explain what they did with her that night.
This case took so many crazy twists and turns. They arrested all 3 of the guys that she was with that night. They arrested a couple of security guards. They let go and then rearrested some of the guys that she was with initially that night. But at the end of the day, they couldn't press charges on any one of those cast of characters.
Natalie's mother refused to be silenced.
I thought about all the hell that the island had dragged us through for 10 days. I made my pledge right there that I would take Natalie's story to every high school and college podium, because no parent should endure what we did.
Beth Holloway established the International Safe Travels Foundation in Natalie's name.
I think it's all about preparedness and just making sure the traveler understands that, you know, their personal safety boils down to them. I ask the young travelers to bring their plans full circle, and we can't help but go back in Natalie's case and think, what if a friend had set a time and a place to meet before they left that establishment? I know it's very simple, but when you're in a foreign country, it can save your life.
In the years to come, some of these criminals will be discovered and brought to justice. But most of these crimes will remain as they are now: shocking, brutal, and unsolved.